Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest-running hiking podcast, downloaded over 1 million times worldwide and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage, coming to you from Bachelor Country.
This is episode 292 of the Australian Hiker Podcast, and in this week's episode we talk about insects and hiking. We hope you enjoy. Before we get into today's episode, if you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published, and if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the supporters page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. There are millions of insect species worldwide, and the vast majority of these don't tend to have a major impact on us as hikers. The key concerns tend to be various fly and mosquito species, and occasionally, at times, things like bees as well, but there tends to be a limit on what is causing us the problems on trail. In this podcast episode, we're going to go through and look at what the main issues with these insects are and what we can do about them to ensure we enjoy our hikes as best as we possibly can. As we mentioned, the key perpetrators are really flies and mosquitoes. They're the two main considerations, and there's many different species of both. And starting off with flies, for us in Australia, there's probably two key ones, or actually three key ones that are going to cause us problems. The first is March fly, and these are relatively large, and I'll say solitary flies here because you don't tend to get swarms of them. And what the problem with the March flies is, the female flies, which feed on blood as part of the reproductive process, are looking for blood from pretty much anywhere, and not just animals, but people tend to be pretty...
Human animals.
Yeah, human animals. And in all honesty, human animals, particularly if they've got bare skin, are probably an easier target than something like a kangaroo or a horse that's got a bit of a thicker skin or a skin that's covered much more in hair than we are. I'll give you an example through here. A number of years ago, I did the main range walk in Kosciuszko National Park. This is one of the key walks in that park and that area of that park. And I think on the day that I did this walk, I counted, I think it was around about 80 odd people that were doing the walk apart from myself. Most of them tend to be doing them in the same direction that I was, but also people doing them in the opposite direction. And I'm sure there are many more people that I didn't come across because they started earlier or travelling faster than I. One thing that I noticed is, particularly in the alpine regions, in that January sort of period, the long weekend in January, it seems to be the perfect weather conditions for March flies, and they are everywhere. And I came across a group of younger people that were hiking, and they were wearing singlets and shorts and thongs on the most part. And I touched base with them a couple of times during the day, and I caught up with them at the end of the day and said, "How did you go?" And the comment they made was, "We won't do that again."
Attacked by March flies in January.
Yeah. Now, I had a long sleeve shirt on, which we'll talk about more in a moment, and the flies were managing to get through that if I wasn't paying attention. Bare skin would have been a nightmare. So, these are biting flies, and it tends to be a bit of a painful bite, not like a bee, but it's painful enough that if they go through and attack you all throughout the day, you certainly know about it. Now, March flies do tend to be more a seasonal thing. That tends to be round about that November, December, January into February period, but it can vary, and it varies from area to area about where they're going to impact you. One thing, and it is anecdotal, is that they seem to be attracted to certain colours of clothing, and I regularly will hike with Jill on some of these hikes, and they seem to bother her, particularly at one stage when she was wearing navy blue pants. Yeah, they'd bother her and not bother me. And I've talked to other hikers that have said the same thing, that navy blue or blue colouring on clothing seems to attract them.
Yeah, it was a really interesting thing, and they were going for that colour. So I had other colours on, weren't interested as much, but definitely that blue kind of steel blue grey, dark grey, definitely attracts the flies.
Now, apart from March flies, we've also got the common house fly, and I'm sure there's probably a more scientific or correct name for them than that.
Well, there are big ones and then little ones, aren't there?
Yeah. And not so much blowflies, but they tend to be a smaller sort of fly, and they tend to be many more of them. So whereas March flies tend to be a bit more solitary, the typical small fly, you get dozens and dozens of them, and they just won't leave you alone. And for us, probably the best example here is when we did the Cape to Cape walk in Western Australia, and the first part of the walk we did in, I think it was roughly March, early April, and the first section of the walk for probably the first 5 kilometres, it was just merciless. They were just bombarding us. Now, Jill had decided to take a head net. I didn't.
Because we were going to WA.
Yeah.
That's all I could think of.
And I just didn't think about it. And for the sake of a fairly small number of grams, it would have been a good choice. And I just eventually I got sick of swallowing and eating flies. So thankfully I had a buff to help reduce the issue. But he
put the buff over his mouth, just in case you're wondering what a buff on his head was going to do to help him.
But yeah, it was more about, not that they were biting and causing a problem that way, but it was just I was swallowing them and they were just causing an irritation in that way. And I think I stopped at about 7 and thought, I need to do something here. So, different sort of issue, but just as annoying.
There was another time that Tim has actually forgotten, and we were on the overland track, and we got to what was the final night, and at the campsite near Lake Clare, and I had to put the tent up by myself because Tim was going absolutely crazy about the flies, and they were quite merciless. He went into the hut and left me to put the tent up because he just couldn't handle it anymore, and he was throwing things and he was really grumpy, and it was just like, go, go. And then the tent was up, he came back and he just got into the tent.
Now, the third type of fly, and I must admit, this is something we haven't had any issues with, but I know some people do, and this is the midges, which look closer to the appearance of a mosquito but are actually a fly, very skinny, long-looking fly compared to the traditional flies. And they often tend to be in areas where there's a lot of water, and they, again, tend to be some varieties are biting versions, and they'll just irritate and bite. So, there are 3 probably main ones that are issues, and there are other varieties around different parts of the country that are going to impact. But certainly, flies can be just so annoying that, sometimes you're so focused on the impact that it's having on you and the annoyance it's creating on you, you're not thinking about the hike itself. And when you start doing that, it's like, why are you actually out there walking when all you're thinking about is the flies?
And it probably does depend on where you're coming from and what you step into, because, people survive coping with these flies, but if you're not used to it, it can be very irritating. And I think that's probably it. It's just irritating, and perhaps sometimes irritating to the extreme.
The next key issue from an insect perspective for us is mosquitoes. Now, for most of us, it tends to be the evening and the nighttime. They tend to be a problem. They tend not to be a problem in bright, sunny sort of days, or they tend to be a problem if you're walking through dense, heavily shaded, moist forests, and they can be an issue as well.
Well, for me, I find a mosquito everywhere. If there's a mosquito nearby, it will bite me.
And these things can have health issues depending on where you are. So Supposedly, we do not have malaria in Australia. I'm sure at some point in the future they'll find we do. What we have is Ross River fever up in the northern parts of Queensland, and apparently coming down into New South Wales as well. While it's not as bad as malaria, it can cause enough health issues as well. So, if you're in an area where there are mosquitoes there, and particularly if you're in the tropics, you do need to do something about mosquitoes. And I've been in areas where I've been doing work, not hiking, and been taking doxycycline as a preventative. But it's never a guarantee with mosquitoes, and it's better to be safe than sorry. The mosquitoes we tend to get in the southern parts of Australia, again, maybe not so much disease issues, but more about they're just buzzing. You get this high-pitched buzzing noise around your ears as you're trying to sleep. They're attracted by your breathing, and as a result, they just become a real annoyance, and then they bite you, which, just
as you're dozing off.
just add insult to injury, and you can end up with really itchy skin. And if there's enough mosquitoes around, you end up with all these welts all over your body and really itchy skin, which is really annoying.
And sometimes, for people, it can be more than just itchy. It can be an irritation, and or it can get infected. So, it's not just a simple thing. For some people, it can be, quite serious.
Now, I did mention bees before, and bees, we've had a couple of issues with bees on hikes, and these are European honeybees we're talking about. Once on the Kangaroo Island Wilderness Trail, and once on the Cape to Cape walk in Western Australia, where there were, within the area, there were beehives. In the case of Kangaroo Island Wilderness Trail, there was a beehive, and they had signs up all over the shelter, which was designed for what to do your cooking and socialising. And if you're trying to cook dinner or get water and there's bees around, it can be a problem. Same sort of issue in Western Australia on the Cape to Cape walk. There was a beehive somewhere. They wanted water, and for them the easiest location was the water tank at the campsite. So trying to get water into a water bottle or a bladder when there's 20 or 30 bees buzzing around the tap is really difficult. Now, we found out that, you leave it until it's dark and the bees disappear. You get up early enough in the morning, which is what we did, and fill up our water bladders, no problem. 10 or 15 minutes after we filled up,
that's right,
the bees were back again. So, I do have a analogy to bees. It doesn't kill me.
I do too.
But it does.
Probably not good people to be hiking together, but hey, hasn't worried us so far.
But they do make us, if I get bitten on an arm, which I did as a child on a regular basis, my arm would swell up, but it never impacted breathing like it can do with people who've got severe allergies. So, they're not a common issue, but they can be an issue for some people, and you can have other issues with other insects as well. So, as we said, there's really, it tends to be a narrow band of things that affect you, but there can be certainly other things or other insects that can affect individuals, like ants as an example. So setting up your tent on an ant's nest is not a good move. So, but having said that's never really been an issue for us for hiking, but it is something to keep in mind wherever you are.
Oh, I don't know. If there are ants around, they'll find me. You know that.
Now, how do we minimise the impacts on our hike of insects? First and foremost, from our perspective, is long pants and long tops. I think from our perspective, are probably a bit of a rarity. I see a lot of people when I'm out hiking, particularly if the weather's warm, wearing short sleeves. Now, short sleeves, particularly in Australia, we've got a high UV, so it's probably not the best thing, and it means you probably need to wear sunscreen if you're wearing short sleeves. I'd just prefer to wear long sleeves and not have to worry about the sunscreen at all. Long pants, again, I don't see so many people wearing shorts these days unless they're doing walks in their local area and they're not far from home. But again, long pants will minimise the impact of most creepy crawlies, so leeches, flies, mosquitoes, anything you can think of. So, and as well as providing that UV protection. The only time I tend to wear short sleeves on a hike is really early in the morning, as in just after sunrise or just before sunrise when it's not freezing cold, or I'll wear it on a short day hike when it's still early in the morning before the flies become a real issue. But again, don't tend to do that often. And shorts tends to be a never for me. I'll occasionally wear pants with the legs zip off. That tends to be more a convenience for sleeping in and makes it easy to wash the parts of the pants that are dirty. But certainly having your legs protected is a good bonus.
Yeah, I rarely have my legs exposed. I can almost guarantee even with sunscreen I'll get burnt knees.
You also need to cover what's left of your skin. And really, if you're wearing long shirts and long pants, really you might have your neck, your hands and your head, and that's about it. Usually I don't tend to have an issue with flies or mosquitoes on my hands. If it is really hot, I will wear a Lycra fingerless glove, more for the UV, but it has the added benefit of protecting from insects. The neck, you've got to be conscious about, again, because of UV, and I might wear a buff on my neck just to protect the neck if I haven't got a collared shirt of some sort. And then you're looking at what you're going to do to cover your head and face. Now, I've got no hair, so covering my head from a UV perspective is critical, but also I want to keep the insects off my head as well. Jill, more so than I do, will wear a head net more regularly. I don't tend to wear a head net unless I know it's going to be really bad. And in all honesty, is it a luxury item? I don't know, but it weighs so little.
No, it's not a luxury item.
It weighs so little and it takes up such little space in your pack. Having it and never using it on a hike is not a bad thing. Now, middle of winter in a cool climate, you probably don't need it. But if it's, you're getting into the hotter parts of the year and, it is summertime, I'd be inclined to carry it. And it was just, as I said, in Western Australia, I thought, we're far enough out of winter. And I've lived in Western Australia before. I've never had an issue with flies in Western Australia before, even in the middle of summer. But I obviously picked the location.
I've never seen so many flies in one place.
And as we said, it was only that first day for the first probably 5 kilometres, and after that it was fine.
Yeah.
So
it was better.
Yeah, it was better. It was. I'd probably say normal as opposed to you were going mad from the impacts of the flies.
The thing about wearing a head net though is that if you are moving fast, it can restrict your breathing. So you have to be mindful of that. And sometimes, you might have to breathe a little bit more deeply and consciously. Because, I don't know, it's that there's just something in terms of the air movement that's a little bit more restricted than when you're not wearing it.
Yeah, and it's a thin gauze, so you wouldn't think it would have an impact, but it can do. And typically, if you have a look at the images on the written version of this podcast, you tend to wear it over the top of your hat, so it keeps the netting away from your face. And in the case of the image on the written version, Jill's got her sunglasses on underneath, and it's potentially you could wear your sunglasses over, but generally what you find
that would look really weird.
I was wearing sunglasses with my buff, and the flies were getting in underneath the lenses themselves, and you get this fly rattling around under your sunglasses, hitting into your eyes. So, again, a head net is quite good. You don't need to choke yourself off around the neck, but it does really reduce the amount of flies or mosquitoes, for that matter, that are going to have a problem. You can get pyrethrum infused or impregnated fly nets or head nets, but we've always tended to use just the stock standard nets and never had an issue with them. So, as I mentioned, in my case, in that Western Australian hike, I didn't have a head net. So if you look on the image, I had my head covered. I had my buff around my face and covering my nose. And I did actually, for the sake of the photos, I took my sunglasses off. But otherwise, I had my sunglasses on there. So there was very little skin exposed. And it's funny, have a close look at the photo and blow it up or zoom it up, and you see what looks like specks of dirt on the camera lenses, and it's actually flies. I've never been able to take photos of flies before like that. They're just buzzing around my head. So again, having a buff is such a useful piece of equipment for covering your head, covering your face. It is such a good multi-purpose piece of gear to carry. The other thing from a preventative point of view is insect repellent. Now, it is really rare that we carry insect repellent on a hike. It's almost non-existent. I think the hike we did on the Gari Great Walk just recently was probably the only time that I can remember that we've carried insect repellent, and we're glad we did.
Yeah.
And strangely enough, it was partly for the mosquitoes. You'd go through and just spray into your hand and just wipe it over your head. I prefer not to spray directly onto my face. And that certainly helped with the mosquitoes. But strangely enough, even though it's called personal insect repellent, the variety we were using, which was DEET-based, also deterred leeches. Now, we used a small 60-gram little spray can, and that lasted us for the 6-day hike for the both of us.
And it was mostly on the leeches.
Yeah, it was mostly on the leeches. And, even though, again, I had a couple of occasions where I was using it to keep the mosquitoes away.
I don't think they're particularly good for mosquitoes out in the bush. So I tend not to use it for that. If I get really frustrated, I will. But my preference still is, even with mosquitoes, is to cover up.
But what we found was, because it was a spray, we could spray our shoes, and that was the best way to deter leeches from trying to climb up our legs. You can get most insect sprays as creams or as gels, but they're not particularly effective with trying to put it on clothing. And again, DEET tends to be the better insect repellent. You find that it tends to be fairly long-lasting, fairly effective, and some of the gels are up to about 80% DEET, and 80% DEET can actually damage some clothing and some gear. It just tends to...
Probably your skin.
And probably your skin as well. But the 40% was doing its job quite effectively.
There's something really interesting, though, about, in areas where people are regularly using insect repellent, I'm sure it's an indicator for the insects to know, because they detect it, they smell it. I'm sure it's an indicator for them to go, hey, there's some humans here, let's go. And, certainly in some of the walks that we've done through Namaji, where we did carry insect repellent, I'm sure we attracted more insects by using it than we did without it. Just anecdotally.
Yeah.
My view of the world.
Certainly you can find that some of the insect repellents these days will come with a sunscreen as well. So rather than trying to apply a sunscreen and insect repellent separately, it's not a bad option to use something that does both.
Yeah. All this chemical, I'm just thinking,
yeah,
put a long sleeve top on.
Yeah, and we do try to minimise using insect sprays where we can. Last but not least is something that most people may not tend to think of is a tent. Now, it might be really warm. It might be warm nights. You don't really need anything to keep you warm, so you've got a lightweight sleeping bag and you decide not to use the tent and sleep out on the open, and then you get eaten by mosquitoes. So it may be that you don't use your full tent. You leave the fly off the tent because it's dry, and all you want is that insect netting barrier created by the internal layer. And I am not a fan of tarp camping where you're sleeping underneath a tarp. I just find that, again, you've got insects, you've got spiders, just anything that's around, that creepy crawly. And I've heard of people having issues with snakes that were
joining them.
Joining them, yes. Rather than being in a tent where you zipped up, it's not going to provide a solid barrier.
Rather than having a thin nylon barrier and an open mesh between you and the baddies.
Yeah.
Good on you.
We don't have problems with bears in Australia.
So be okay.
It must be because of the tent. Okay, so just as a wrap-up of this, most of this might seem like really common sense. For me, if I'm walking around a city or a town, I'll wear short sleeves, long sleeves. I'll wear shorts. Normally when you're in a major city, you tend not to have huge problems with insects, so you tend not to think about it. Nighttime, if you're going camping or you're at home or you're having a barbecue, you might put out the citron candles or the bug zappers or things like that. If it's bad, you'll use the insect sprays. But you tend to think about it in those sort of environments. But when you go out bush, for some reason, for a lot of people, you tend not to think about it. And as I said, in my case, wearing long pants and long top is more about minimising the impact of UV, but the added bonus is that it also reduces the impact of insects. As I said, we rarely ever use insect repellent at home. But this one hike, the time that Jill decided for whatever reason to take insect repellent with us, it really paid off.
It was for the mosquitoes.
Yeah, and we were thinking, mosquitoes, and it was probably more, as Jill said, for me it was the mosquitoes and the leeches. For her, it was the leeches. But it was really well worth the fact that we carried it. Whereas I'd never carried insect spray on a hike previously.
Yeah, and I hadn't either. It was really the only one that I could get, so it was a matter of no choice. But I just felt that I needed something. And I guess the other thing, Tim, you were talking about when you're at home and you're having a barbecue, and how many times have, you said, oh, the mozzies are just too much, let's go inside. Well, when you're out hiking, when you're out tenting it, you can't do that. I mean, you can't just walk away because you're there. And after a few days, it does have the potential to send you nuts, or the potential to, if you get overbitten, to make you quite sick.
And we have had occasions where the insects, the mosquitoes in particular, have been so bad that we've gone to bed really early just to get away from them. So you get in the tent and usually get in the fact you are getting into the tent, you let a certain number in. So you settle down.
And then you've got to clean the tent out.
Yeah, you've got to work out where the mosquitoes are inside the tent and kill them, and work out, is that mosquito inside the tent or on the outside of the tent? And sometimes it's pretty hard to tell. So again, on the Agari Great Walk, we went to bed. We thought we'd killed all the mosquitoes. We were hearing mosquitoes.
Eliminated. We eliminated them.
Eliminated them, yeah. And we thought we were hearing them again. We were turning the light on and trying to work out where they were. Most of them were on the outside, but we did pick up a couple of extras that we missed, including one that had either bitten myself or Jill because it was full of blood.
Well, when it was squashed,
yeah.
We knew that.
So I think the thing with insects is to have some sort of conscious plan in place, whatever that may be that suits you. And again, from our perspective, it involves long pants and long tops.
Retreating into the tent early.
It involves having a buff, and a buff really is such a versatile piece of equipment. Even if all you do is put it on your face so you're not swallowing flies, it is well worth carrying for no other reason. And quite often I'll carry two on there, one for my head, one for my neck, and again, the one on the neck can actually pull up over the face. So it really is worthwhile considering. So put a bit of thought into what you're going to do and whether you need to carry things like a head net. For some reason, it's nothing that's really mentioned on hikes. You look at some of the hikes we've done, you look at Gari, or you look at, we'll talk about the insects and the leeches. You look at the Western Australian Cape to Cape walk, we talk about the issues we had with flies.
No one else mentions the flies.
No.
I don't know why.
And a lot of trail reviews quite often tend to be, this is a really wonderful walk, but what are the negatives? And the insects is something you do need to know about. And for the sake of maybe a small container of insect repellent, maybe a buff, maybe a head net, which is going to be fairly low on the weight impact on what you're carrying, is well worth it.
And it's not so much about, deciding not to do the hike. It's about being prepared for it. So, you wouldn't miss out on those fabulous experiences and those amazing views just because of a few flies. But if you plan for a few flies, then you might enjoy it more.
Okay, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. That's all for this week. Bye for now.
And bye from me.